Now, something that I did that I think is going to be really, really useful for you guys. I'm going to be giving these arrangements away for free. There will be a link in the description below for where to download these. I've done several versions of Autumn Leaves that correlate with the things that we're learning in this chapter. Hello, welcome to the Heart of the Piano YouTube channel. I'm Bob Rose, and welcome to the much awaited video on Chapter 5, talking about the Jazz Piano Book by Mark Levine. It's been a lot of months. Has it maybe been a year or something since I did the last one? So many people have been asking for this. This chapter is a nightmare. So I've spent quite a few days looking at this, thinking, how do I make sense of this mess of a chapter? But really, what this chapter is about, by the time you get to the end of this chapter, the aim seems to be to get you to be playing stuff that sounds like proper real jazz. I'm not at all convinced by how he's laid this chapter out. Let's just dive straight into it. So if you remember chapter 3, and there will be a link above and a link below to when I spoke about chapter 3. The point of chapter 3 was to get you to play shells. The shell is like the 3 and the 7 in the right hand as well as the 1 in the left hand. If we look at the tune on page 28, this is Infant Eyes by Wayne Shorter. This is in chapter 5. The goal of chapter 3, 2 chapters ago, was to get you to be able to play the melody with the root of the chord in the left hand, and then in the right hand you are going to be playing both the 3rd and the 7th scale degrees. If you're already playing the 3rd scale degree, then you don't need to double it. Same thing with the 7th scale degree. So for example, Infant Eyes, what we did in chapter 3, here the melody is the flat 7. That means that we need to add the flat 3 below it, which is the B flat. Then the melody here in bar 2 is the flat 3, so we need to add the flat 7, and so on and so on. So this is what we kind of learned in chapter 3, and then just basically got thrown in at the deep end, saying now go and, try doing this in fake books where we just weren't ready for it. Anyway, so that was what happened in chapter 3. And at the beginning of this chapter, they basically show you, this is what we did. So if we take this as the melody in figure 5-1, let's say the top is the melody. It's not an enthralling melody, but... And then basically if we fill it out, adding whatever chord tones are necessary, so that there's always the 3 and the 7, we get exactly what is in figure 5-1, which is so for example, in the very first chord, we've got the 1 in the left hand, then we have a flat 7 and the flat 3 in the right hand. Then we have the 1, the 3 and the flat 7. And then here, for the F minor 7, we've got the 1 in the left hand, the flat 3 in the right hand, the flat 7, the melody on the top is a 9th, and so on and so on. So then, and this is where chapter 5 is just a nightmare. Why is it so confusing? So in the left-hand side, it basically says the easiest way to start adding notes to 3-note voicings is shown in figure 5-3. And this is just really baffling, because basically the rules that they give you is to the 2 chord, add the 5th. And that's like, I don't know why they've put 2 in uppercase Roman numerals. That should be lowercase numerals because the 2 is minor. So Anyway, so to the minor 2 chord, like so for example, if we're doing a 2-5-1 in C major, the 2 would be D minor 7, the 5 would be G dominant 7, and the 1 would be C major 7. To the minor 2, the like in C major would be the D minor 7th. So to the 2 chord, add the 5th scale degree. To the dominant, the 5th chord, add the 9th scale degree, or the flat 9. To the 1 chord, add the 5th scale degree and the 9th scale degree. Now, just as a quick aside, one of the most important habits that my students, on the whole, my beginner students in jazz, take ages realizing, no, you have to do this, you have to get this as a habit, is no matter what you're playing, you've got to instantly be able to know what those scale degrees are. So if we go back to Infant Eyes by Wayne Shorter, which is on the next page, page 28, anybody who wants to learn to play jazz needs to be able to look at this and go, okay, here, the melody note, this is a flat 7, 5, flat 7, 1, flat 3, and notice that I've changed the frame of reference. So here, in the first bar, here, 1 is G because the chord is G minor 7, which means that the melody is flat 7, 5, flat 7, 1. Here the melody now becomes a flat 3 because the 1 is an F because the chord is F minor 7. So we've got flat 3, 9, and then the chord changes again. So the G was a 9. Now the F becomes a 9 because E flat is 1. So 9, 7, 13, 5, flat 9, and so on and so on. And I think, even classical musicians really need to be able to do this, in my opinion, but this is for a whole different video. Anyhow, when it says to the 2 chord add the 5th scale degree, to the 5 chord add the 9th scale degree, yes, you have to be able to, no matter what you're playing, you've got to know what all the scale degrees are. And this only comes about when you've practiced doing this, because what so many of the students do for a long time who I teach jazz to, they try to just fall back on their ear and be intuitive. And yes, there is a time when you do want to be completely intuitive, but when you're first starting to learn jazz, there's so many paradoxes in this, and you're going to hear so much conflicting advice about this. And there'll be times when I say to beginner students, no, now you want to be intuitive. It's very difficult to explain using rules and to say definitively, now you want to be intuitive, now you want to think about everything. But it is important that you practice as much as you can, that no matter what you're playing, you can instantly, logically and intellectually and analytically go, this note I'm playing here is this particular scale degree of whatever chord I'm playing, as well as also being able to tap into the intuition. This is way more than I can talk about in a YouTube video, but it is important that you know what scale degrees you're on. So anyway, so then they show this kind of to the 2 chord add the 5th, to the 5 chord, blah, blah, blah. They show you this in figure 5.3, which is like a very abstract way of learning how this applies to jazz, where, in the key of C major, you've got a 2-5-1. Normally, you'd have added, to have the usual shell, you'd have the flat 3 and the flat 7 in the right hand. And you might recognize this from chapter 3. The 7th falls down the semitone to the next chord. And then here, the 7th falls down the semitone to the next chord. So you've got... And now what they're suggesting with these rules is that you can change it. On the D minor 7, you add the 5th scale degree. You now have this. It sounds a little bit richer. And then the reason why they say this is for voice leading, because in this chord, the D minor 7, the A, the 5th scale degree, now if you leave that note where it is, this A, to the next chord, it becomes the 9th of the G7, the G dominant 7th. So the A here is the 5th scale degree. Now that exact same note is the 9th scale degree. And then for some weird reason, they're saying for the C major 7, you add the 9 and the 5, which does sound nice, but it kind of defeats the point of the voice leading, because suddenly the 9 has just sort of kind of come out of nowhere. But let's just run with it. Let's run with this. And then the same thing here. Here we're adding the 5. The 5 is now at the top. It's the A at the top. The A at the top now becomes the 9th of the G dominant 7th. And then here we've got the 9th and the 5th, and so on, and so on. They also explained that you can flatten the 9th. So if we go through that again, here we have the flat 3, the 5, the flat 7. And then instead of going to the next chord, leaving the 5th scale degree A where it was, here we're going to flatten it so that it has this kind of chromatic step down. I'm not really sure why they've done this, because it's more common when you have a flat 9. This isn't all the time, but a lot of the time, as they do kind of say later on, when you've got a dominant 7 flat 9, a lot of the time it implies that you're moving towards a minor tonic, a minor 1 chord. So usually, but not always, if you've got a G dominant 7 flat 9, that can often mean that you're going to like a C minor 7, and I'm going to play it as a minor major 7. And what that also implies is that the 2 minor chord, like say we're in the key of C, C minor, the 2 chord would very commonly be a D half diminished or a D minor 7 flat 5, because the flat 5, the A flat, is the same note as the flat 9 in the G dominant 7 flat 9. Anyhow, gonna come back to that later on. So, you know, it's they've given you these rules. They've given you this very kind of ideal scenario where you have this, and then it never comes up again, which is absolutely bizarre, because then what happens is they give you infant eyes on the next page, and then for some weird reason, they get you as an exercise to do exactly the same thing you did in chapter 3. And what you did in chapter 3 was you basically played through the whole thing without the melody, only basically doing the shell, which is the 3 and the 7. And I guess the only thing that's different is you've got the odd sus chord. And if you remember, when you have a sus chord, say you've got a G dominant 7 sus, or here they just call it G sus, but really it's a G dominant 7 sus or G7 sus. What you do is you go a tone down from the G, or a whole step down from the G, play that triad, so it would be an F major triad over G, and that is how you play like a G7 sus, or G sus as they call it. So you've got some of those. You've also got in some of these a Phrygian chord, or they also call it a sus flat 9. I'm not going to go over that again. I covered this in the last video in this series. It was in chapter 4, where I was like, why on earth are they covering this in chapter 4? No one's ready for this. But so, you know, you've basically got, you've got sus chords, you've got Phrygian chords, and they tell you to ignore any other chords and just treat them as standard chords, which I don't understand why. We did this in chapter 3. They then show you how you would do that, which is that they give it to you here in figure 5-6 on page 29. And, you know, that's quite boring, so I'm going to kind of ignore that and then go to the next page, page 30, where you do that with the melody. And I guess is a little bit beyond chapter 3, because you're now encouraged to do some of these new types of chords, but essentially it is still chapter 3. What happened? I don't understand. They told you right at the beginning of this chapter, add the 5 to the 2 chord, add the 9 to the 5 chord, and add the 2 and the 5 to the 1 chord. And now you're doing all of this, and now you're basically doing infant eyes with all of the marked chords, and it's just shells. It's just more or less what you did in chapter 3. What happened to add all these extra notes? So, it's a bit of a mystery to me. It's worth doing this though, and it's a very, very beautiful melody. And there's some very weird things here that they haven't told you how to do. So for example, in bar 4, suddenly the 7th scale degree is in the left hand. It's not in the right hand. They would have got you playing this. They would have got you playing the G in the right hand, but suddenly they've got 1 and 7 in the left hand. At no point have they explained to you how and why you would want to do this, which is, I think, just very weird. Now, you're doing this because of voice leading. So if we go from the beginning, well, it's also weird that they've left that B flat. I mean, I was going to talk about voice leading. So we've got, yeah, I mean, it's the B flat has jumped up to the E flat. That's not great voice leading. Then suddenly there's a big jump down to this G in the thumb in the right hand. And what they've done is they've kept that G in the same place by putting it into the left hand. So, that's quite nice. But then it's a bit weird why they've had good voice leading in that moment but not in the other moments. It just doesn't make any sense. Again, the 7th is in the left hand. It's just, they've just made some pretty weird choices here, if you ask me. And then, there's some other weird things, like in bar 12, they've suddenly got an open voicing in the right hand, open voicing being where it goes over more than an octave. So, so far it's more or less following the rules of chapter 3. I'm going from bar 10, bar 11, and then suddenly bar 12 is like stacked fifths in the right hand. Usually you'd put that G up here next to the melody, but they've put it down here. It's a bit of a weird thing. They haven't sort of started explaining to you why we're doing this. I mean, it's nice. It's just kind of odd. So what I've done, here's something I prepared earlier, as they say on cook shows. I looked at infant eyes, and I carried out what I think they should have got you to do. They should have asked for this, which is to take this melody and go through it in the same way that we did in chapter 3, the same way that they're doing here in figure 5-7, but do what they recommended earlier, which is basically to the 2 chord, add the 5th scale degree. To the 5 chord, add the 9th scale degree. To the 1 chord, add the 9th and 5th scale degree. So I've gone through and done that. So far it's okay, and in many ways you can kind of tell why they haven't done this, because it actually doesn't sound all that great. So they've told you it's a really good idea to follow these rules, and then immediately don't do them in the piece that they come to, because in this particular piece it just doesn't really work all that well. But I'm going to show you, like with a different piece, how these can actually be quite useful. Anyway, so we've got to bar 9. So here I had to be a little bit creative, because so here we've got this is bar 12. We've got the 5th scale degree, we've got the 7th scale degree, and then the chord symbol asks for a sharp 11, which is the melody. We also need the 9th. Now, if I also have the 3rd, which we also need for the shell, that is a lot of notes and doesn't sound all that great. So what I've basically done, the sharp 11 in the melody in this bar, the note immediately after that is the 3. And I feel like it's going to the 3, so I don't need to play the 3. So I left the 3 out because the melody note is resolving to the 3. So that's what's happening in bar 12. And yeah, you know, some of these don't sound very satisfying, but anyway, I've basically carried out the exercise because I still think it's worth doing. So yeah, you know, that's okay. Now, something that I did that I think is going to be really, really useful for you guys, and I'm going to be giving these arrangements away for free. There will be a link in the description below for where to download these. I've done several versions of Autumn Leaves that correlate with the things that we're learning in this chapter. So what I've done exactly the same thing with Autumn Leaves. I've done a very, very simple version of it, like as simple as I could bear to make it, where I'm doing the shells like in chapter 3. So we've got shells, and I'm adding the 5 to the 2 chord, the 9 to the 5 chord, and the 9 and the 5 to the 1 chord. So we've got which is, you know, I think that's quite sweet. And that system of, you know, adding those extra notes works really beautifully with Autumn Leaves. I think much more successfully than with this Infant Eyes, I think. So, yeah, you know, if you like it, you want to play it, feel free to download it from the link below. You know, there were a few places where I stretched the odd thing. And basically, this is sort of a composite of a couple of versions from different fake books. I didn't just take it from one fake book. I took the best bits from 2 or 3 fake books. And then, you know, most jazz people, well, good jazz people, the way that we've been learning this so far, it's almost like paint by numbers. We follow the rules. We add, you know, the right notes. We're adding the right notes here, and so on and so on. But, you know, really, the way that we get good at jazz is we listen to a lot of jazz, we transcribe jazz. You know, I'll probably be doing a lot more videos on the importance of transcribing. No one becomes a jazz musician without transcribing by ear. And, you know, that I would not be the musician I am now, even as a classical musician, had it not been for the fact that I started learning electric guitar when I was like 15, 16, before the internet existed. The only way you could learn electric guitar before the internet was you had to put on records or CDs and you had to work it out yourself what they were playing. And, you know, no one's born with these skills. I was terrible at it. I was a typical classical musician in that I'd listened to it and had no idea how to work it out. So I painfully for years worked out how to get good at that, because otherwise, if you don't work that out, you're never going to be a decent rock, blues, jazz musician. You have to go through that. Anyway, so where I'm getting to with that is that then I've made a second version of Autumn Leaves where I've left everything exactly as it is. Pretty much I haven't changed anything in the right hand, but in the left hand, I just basically started adding extra notes, not using theory, but just things that I just wanted to hear and inner voices and other stuff going on. And this is tricky, and this is the problem. This is the problem with jazz, teaching jazz, and the jazz piano book. Because what happens after figure 5-7 of Infant Eyes is it then basically, the reason why this chapter is a nightmare is because then on the next page, it then goes, now if we just add a few extra notes, now it sounds like this. And it's like, whoa, how did you get to that? And, one of the answers is you only really truly get to that by listening to a lot of jazz and starting to get an intuitive feeling of what feels good. However, having said that, for you guys out there in, the YouTube audience, I am going to break it down for you and show you the strategies and the different things that you can do to get that, which they obviously just couldn't be bothered with and just threw their hands up and said, and you can do this without explaining to you how you make that leap into the next thing. So anyway, in a way, I'm now doing exactly the thing that I'm accusing these guys of, which is making my own little leap with the left hand. But, basically... And what we've got are like counter melodies or, the extra little things that are flowing in the left hand. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I'm just going to show you what you can do with this. But then in the actual jazz piano book, I am going to explain to you how they've made a lot of these leaps into the next step. So yeah, basically this Autumn Leaves is exactly what I did in the previous one. It's adding the 5 to the 2 chord, the 9 to the 5 chord, the 2 and the 5 to the 1 chord. But I've just added extra things in the left hand because I couldn't bear. I just, it's very difficult. It's almost painful, for jazz musicians to go... that's almost like a classical thing to do, to just sit there and not fill in gaps and not be creative, So, like when I was just playing this on its own, I couldn't help but just start adding extra things in. And I thought, I'll just write some of them down for you because it then actually makes this easy version of Autumn Leaves actually quite enjoyable to play. Again, no jazz person would play this the same way twice, but this is what I've written down. I did add a little bit to the right hand there, but it's almost as if it's an extension of the left hand. And I had to really restrain myself from wandering off into much more advanced stuff that my hands just wanted to do. I had to really work hard to keep it on the tracks. So I'm just going to go back from the end of the second time section. Which I think is not too shabby. That's not too shabby an arrangement. Just, all I did was take this very simple concept of, pretty much just doing it by numbers, adding the 5 to the 2, the 9 to the 5, the 2 and the 5 to the 1. All I did was just that by numbers, and then just add little bits of extra left hand. But, I'm going to have to cover in a completely different video exactly how you start doing that kind of stuff. It's just like you can, and you're welcome to download this. It's going to be in the description below. So let's now take a look at where they go. Well, it's not quite the next page, but the page after that. And then what they say, and it's so funny because, like, basically on page 33, it says you can enhance infant eyes by adding just a few notes here and there to the three-note voicings. Yeah, just add a few notes here and there. But when you actually look at it, this is a lot more than just a few notes here and there. So this is page 32, just adding a few notes here and there. This is so much more than just a few notes here and there. It's insane. What have we got here? Yeah. So, for example, bearing in mind this is the very first time that we're now doing anything beyond just doing shells. Before we were told when you get to a 2 chord, which is basically a minor, when you get to a minor 7th chord, just add the 5th. But here they've added the 5th and the 9th. And they've added the 5th in the left hand, not in the right hand, like they were sort of saying everything before. It's just suddenly loads of things in the left hand. And look at how much is in the left hand here, this big wide voicing. Hopefully you remember the definition of voicing from chapter 3 that I did. Basically, these are suddenly quite advanced voicings. You've got stacked 5ths in the left hand, almost stacked 5ths in the right hand. You've got like stacked 4ths in the right hand with then 5th in the left hand. Now we've got an added 13th in this dominant 7 flat 9 chord. And oh my God, it's just like this is on a whole different planet. So, what I've done is I've written down some basic kind of observations that I've made about what are they basically doing here? What are some of their different strategies that they're doing here? So I'll break it down. One strategy, instead of just having just the 1 in the left hand, sometimes we want 1 and 5 in the left hand. And sometimes we want 1 and 7 in the left hand. Now, a lot of what should guide you here is good voice leading. So if you look at this, you'll notice that almost every single note doesn't move that far away to get to this chord, and every single note on its own, as if every single note was sung by a different singer. You imagine that those individual singers moving to the next chord, they don't jump about all that much. This one jumps about quite a lot. But on the whole, it tends not to do it that much. So, that's one of the guiding principles of a lot of voice leading. And again, it's quite an advanced thing. That's something that could probably make endless videos about. Anyway, so like I was talking about before, something that defines a lot of really nice, sort of more modern jazz voicings. And when jazz people use the word modern, they really mean the last 50 or 60 years. That's what modern means in jazz. So there's a lot of chords here, and a lot of chords in general in good jazz that are stacked 5ths. This is like, these are 5ths in the left hand stacked on top of each other, and in the right hand, stacked 5ths separated by a minor 2nd, stacked 5ths. Or we can have this, which is stacked 5ths in the left hand, stacked 4ths in the right hand. These are very typical kind of jazz voicings. So right from the bar 2, we've got almost stacked 5ths in both hands. It's just the B flat moved down to the A. And then stacked 4ths in the right hand, kind of stacked 4ths in the right hand here, stacked 4ths in the right hand, this is bar 5, and so on and so on. This is basically a very common thing in jazz. They've started adding more extensions, like there's quite a few chords where they've just added 13ths onto. I'm probably going to have to talk in a different video about how you know which extensions you can add, but they are adding 13ths, 9ths, sharp 11s, something for a different video really, but just be aware this is one of the things that they're doing to suddenly go, oh, just add a few extra notes. Some of those few extra notes are extra extensions such as 13ths and sharp 11s and ninths where they hadn't instructed you to do ninths and so on. Sometimes they add 13ths in major 7s. And then sometimes they take major 7 chords and don't play a major 7. They get you just to play a 6th chord. So, for example, here is C major 7, C, E, G, B. We can also play a C6. That is with the A instead of the B. That is a C major 6 chord, or just C6. So, and by the way, I think they do explain this somewhere, but very often this 7th chord, this 7th interval, can actually sound quite dissonant. So if you're playing, let's say, C major 7, and C is the 1 chord, you are in the key of C, this actually can be a little bit dissonant. So sometimes it's nicer just to play the 6th. It just has a little bit more of a mellow, settled quality to it. So something else that they've done, in the left hand, we've had stacked 5ths. We've had 7ths, like 1 and the 7 shell in the left hand. Something that they also do is having the 1st scale degree, the 5th scale degree, and then the 3 like a 10th above. So it's like 1, 5, 3. That's something that they do quite a lot. Sometimes you have to spread it, because if I play it on E flat, there's no way my thumb can get to G. So sometimes you've just got to spread the chord, or you can spread it like this, or you can go and hop up to these 2 chords. It's, it depends how you want to do it. Or there are times when you can rearrange it and catch it in your right hand. So that's another common thing that you want to look out for. Now, in one of these chords, they asked for, let's call it C. If we were playing a C major 7, what they did is then they turned it into a C major 7 sharp 11. So that would have like an F sharp. Now, one way you can play this, you can think of this as an upper structure triad. So it's like a triad in the right hand that's different from what's in the left hand. And what you can do, like how if we wanted to make a C sus chord, you would go down a tone or a whole step, you would go down to the B flat, make a B flat triad over the C. Now you've got C dominant 7 sus, or C sus. That's like thinking of it as an upper structure triad of B flat. But what you can do, you can take it the opposite direction. If you've got C major, if you take the right hand up a tone or a whole step to D major, and you play that, you now have basically the extensions 9, sharp 11 and 13. If you play the shell in your left hand of the 1 and the 7, you've now basically got a C major 13 sharp 11. So, or you could also call it just C major 7 sharp 11. And that's kind of the way that they've dealt with that chord here in this figure, where are we, figure 5/8. That they've added the 13th as well by thinking of the top as a kind of upper structure triad, a tone or a whole step higher. Mine doesn't sound so good because the right hand is in root position. They tend to sound better. Upper structure triads tend to sound better when they're not in root position. That one sounds quite good. So, what else have we got? There is some octave doubling in the right hand, not that much, but some. So bar 1, bar 2, you've doubled the A flat in the right hand. And if you remember back at the beginning of the chapter, when we were looking at the example of how you could take the very first thing that they looked at, there was a lot of octave doubling in the right hand. So I'm looking here at figure 5/2. Where anything can be doubled in the right hand, they double it. This can be doubled, this can be doubled. Here, that's too difficult to double. I don't have enough fingers to be able to double that comfortably. I can't really do that comfortably. But then, when we get to the 3rd bar, you can double this in the right hand. Everything becomes doubled. This is too difficult to double. And anyway, so back to where we were. And, talking about doubling, they double a lot. Whatever the melody is, whatever's in your little finger in your right hand, generally that's okay when you double it with your thumb, an octave lower in the right hand. But if you notice, not much else gets doubled. In fact, it seems that they generally go to great pains not to double anything. Now, that doesn't mean that you should never double. But, you know, in classical music, we're used to doubling stuff all the time. We'll play big, thick chords where, you know, here we've got 3 Cs, 2 Es, 2 Gs, everything sort of super doubled, and classical music has very thick chords. I think because jazz is just so much spicier. It's not just triads. There's all these extensions and all these different notes going on. I think it's just a bit overwhelming if we double that much stuff. So just notice that they really haven't doubled that many notes unless they're doubling whatever's in the melody. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. And I double a little bit in my jazz arranging, but just be aware that that's a really good guideline. Don't unnecessarily double things. And if you remember as well, back in chapter 3, they told you don't play the 5. Now we're adding the 5 in quite a lot of places. But, you know, what we want to do in jazz is try to not play unnecessary notes. In classical music, you know, if I'm playing this thick chord, this is the kind of voicing that you'd have all the time in classical music. Now, if I leave one of these notes out, say I left the E, it's a C major chord, say I left the E out of the left hand, it's not a massive difference. Or maybe say I leave it out of the right hand, if I take the E out of the right hand. It's not a massive difference. In jazz, you'd be like, just leave it out, just don't put it in. Now, what I did is I took all these various things that I've just given you as separate kind of bullet points of the things that I've observed in infant eyes, this figure 5/8, simply add this, and I've added them to Autumn Leaves. So what I've tried to do in this version of Autumn Leaves is not have all the complicated left hand. I've tried to keep it as simple as I possibly could, although maybe about 2/3 of the way through, I just couldn't help myself. I had to start adding some of that back in because it's just what jazz is. It's just, I couldn't help it. It just needed it. But certainly in the first 2/3 of it, I tried to start off very simply, because if you notice, you know, back to this, in this chapter 5, even when they go, just add all these extra notes, they're not doing all the complicated things like I was doing in the left hand. It's just, apart from the melody, it's just one note per bar, and then it's only the melody that carries on. So they've been very, very restrained with all of that. More restrained than I've been with this. But you know, to show you how you can take what they've done to infant eyes and haven't explained to you, they haven't really told you how to do most of this stuff. And then I've applied this to Autumn Leaves, which again, you're welcome to download and play. So we've got... So again, this is, you know, a similar voicing to the voicing that we've got in bar 2 of Infant Eyes. We've got stacked fifths in the left hand, and then, you know, almost stacked fifths here in the right hand. And I'm alternating in the beginning. There's like a sequence going down where I'm alternating between stacked fifths and then a fifth. Then there's a seventh. So I'm using this expanded sort of left-hand vocabulary, if you like. So places like here, this is where I was putting the E that's in the left hand, that's now the seventh. It was all in the right hand, but it's actually so much nicer if I take this note here, move it down here, much nicer. So from the beginning. And I've been a bit self-indulgent here. I've gone a little bit beyond anything that they did in this chapter 5, because I've added this, what I think is a really beautiful cluster right in the middle of this chord. I've got F sharp, G, and A. That's quite it's quite rich, and personally, I'm a sucker for voicings like that. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. Some jazz pianists are like, oh, that's too much, and they try and simplify it down. Personally, my style is I like that richness. So, so this is where I just couldn't help myself. I couldn't help but just start adding more left-hand stuff. Let me go again from like the after the second time bar. Nothing that complicated going on here. And it was when I did this, I just heard this line, and as soon as I did this, it was like I got pulled into wanting to add more left-hand stuff. And then I just had to start adding. And then once I was there, well, we've got to have notice how I'm looking for all these lines in the middle, and at the moment I'm in bar 16, so it could go there, or I think that's where I hear it going. But you know, I'm always listening for these inner lines. And it's not just classical people who are listening for all these counterpoints and stuff. All good jazz pianists are all listening for all these inner lines. Some jazz pianists are much better at it than others. But, you know, you want to think of the music as being very, very horizontal, as sort of what all the lines, different lines are doing. It's not just this chord, this chord, this chord, but how all these lines weaven out with each other. Again, you know, it's sort of getting onto more advanced territory, but the more jazz piano you'll listen to and the more you transcribe, you'll just start to notice that it does all this, and you'll start to just feel it in your fingers. Anyway, where were we? So again, you know, we've got these stacked fifths, we've got I'm adding more extensions, and I'm making all the voicings a lot richer. So notice that this line here, that line that I've got. So, whoops. And what I went for here in bar 19, I deliberately didn't, well, I think first of all, I was doubling the third, but I thought, no, I don't want to double that third. So I just had the seventh and the ninth in the right hand, which is quite a nice sound. And then, because I didn't want to go too crazy and start changing all the chords, I've just basically harmonized the melody in sixths in the right hand. That's lovely, that left hand there, I think. Oh, yes. Now, I slightly cheated and stretched something here. You were told that you could start having flat nines instead of nines. For reasons that are a little bit complicated to go into, I put in a sharp nine here. So we've got the 1. So this is bar 21. I've got the 1, the third scale degree, the flat 7. So this is the shell of the B dominant 7th. And then we've got the 5th scale degree up at the top. And then rather than having the flat 9, which would be a C, I actually went with a sharp 9, which is D. And then resolve that down to the flat 9, which I think is beautiful. It's a little more spicy, but I really like it. So let me go from the beginning of that line, bar 18. Oh, isn't that delicious? I love that. The dominant 7 sharp 9 is one of my favorite chords. Perhaps some of that is because I am an electric guitarist. I love Hendrix. A lot of people just call it the Hendrix chord. There's so many of his pieces that, you know, like a... That's the dominant 7 sharp 9, which is basically the same as the chord that I'm using here. Oh, I love that chord. And then here, I quite like the way I've stretched this out. I actually kept the chords relatively simple. I didn't add loads of extensions because they go through quite a complicated progression. This is a nice one. Here I've added the 13th to it, the last chord of bar 23. So let me just take that again. And then here, I just decided to add a sharp 11. I'm not totally sure it works, but I wanted to do it because it was something that they'd been doing in, you know, this last version of Infant Eyes. So we've got... C major 7, sharp 11. So let me play it again, see if there's any other things I can spot. I'll do it without the first time bar. Oh, and here, yeah, I went for a 6th chord there. Instead of a minor 7. I went for the 6. So you can do that with minor as well as the major chords. Notice how you have to keep the... And by the way, if I've not mentioned this before, obviously there's a lot of stuff here that you actually physically can't play. You've got to be quite creative and clever with the pedal. And in many ways, you know, what I've put... where did I get to? Yeah, here. It actually is impossible to play this unless you really stretch. Actually, I could stretch that, but I wouldn't stretch it. So I'm not expecting people in bar 13 to absolutely keep hold of that F sharp at the top. It's more like you can still keep hearing it in your head, even if you've let go of it and changed the pedal. So in your head, you've got da-dum, da-da-dum. And even though that note isn't coming from the piano anymore, because I'm still hearing it, it's almost as if it is still being played. Imagine that note is still there. Even though I let go of it, it's kind of still there. What have we got here? And also, for some people, in case you're not aware, you can play 2 notes with your thumb, like I'm doing in bar 16. When I wrote it down, I specifically had in mind that you would play the B and the C with your thumb at the same time. Some people seem really shocked that composers would do this, but yes, composers very frequently think, yes, of course you're going to play 2 notes with your thumb. And again, if you can't stretch it, you can just spread the chord. Now, I've got to emphasize, this is not how I would do Autumn Leaves, because, and you know, this is what we're going to be coming to in future chapters. Very few, almost no good jazz pianists will just do the chords that are written down. Well, for one thing, most jazz people are not even really going to look at chords that are written down. Yes, okay, they might use lead sheets and iReal Pro when they're jamming with other musicians, but even then, pretty quickly, unless it's a unless it's a very casual jam night or a very low paid gig, if it's a really decent gig and they're decent musicians, they're going to start completely changing all the chords. So I would pretty much never play Autumn Leaves in this way, where I haven't really changed the chords. And I'm not talking about, like, you know, in some of them where it says C major 7, and instead of C major 7, I'm actually playing a C major 13 sharp 11. To me, that's still the same chord. I haven't really changed it. I think one of the chapters after this talks about tritone substitutions. This is an absolute minimum of something that I would start doing with things like this. So, you know, when I was playing around with these, again, you can download them in the description below, I felt like really in a straitjacket of, like, you know, usually I would just immediately start changing so many of these chords. Hopefully I've helped you understand what on earth is going on here in this chapter 5, and this sudden jump to quite advanced playing that you get to by the end of the chapter. And then you get to all the section at the end where they show you all the other chords that they think that you might possibly need, without really explaining to you how you're going to take them and use them in your arrangement. It's like, oh, okay, so yeah, now I've got, you know, a G9, G7 flat 9, G7 sharp 9, G7 with an 11th, and then, you know, they carry on showing you half diminished and augmented, but they don't really in any way explain to you or give you examples of how you incorporate that into what you're doing. It's, you know, I'll have to sort of go to another video and kind of talk you through all that kind of stuff. And then they just throw you in at the deep end and go, now do it. No, yeah, I mean, there's just no way that anyone can pick up this book on their own and teach themselves. And no wonder I looked at this book years and years ago and was just like, what? You know, this book is brilliant. Like I've said in previous videos, this book is brilliant once you already know and understand everything that's in it. then it's an amazing book, because it just kind of sums everything up, you know, really nicely. So if you have any questions, my God, please do put questions in the comments below. You know, I'll absolutely, I'm not always great about staying on top of comments, but I will really try and keep on top of comments for this video. If anyone is looking for a teacher, I do have space in my online studio for more students. I find that online lessons work very well. A couple of years ago, for the first time in ages, I got myself a teacher online. So, you know, I really loved myself being a student online. There's a lot of really positive things about it. Most of what I do is sort of quite high-level advanced classical, but I do play jazz as well. I do teach it. I think because I've always played jazz. You know, I've winged it. I've just basically winged it, not having a clue what I was doing with jazz when I was younger. But in recent years, I've sort of made it my mission to properly learn jazz and sort of figure out the theory and actually what I'm doing. And I think because of this, I like to think that I'm a good teacher for people who sort of find that they're not getting it, they don't understand the theory, because I've been there for most of my life. For most of my life, I didn't understand tritone substitutions and, you know, all this kind of stuff, despite looking in books like this. And now it's like, oh my God, it's so easy. But, you know, it actually is easy when it gets broken down and explained well. But also, I think that what I do is particularly good for people who come from a classical background, because for a long time I was a classical pianist who just absolutely wasn't getting this stuff. And now that I get it, I'm like, why didn't someone explain it to me in these kinds of ways? So Anyway, so yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please do take the time to like and subscribe and click on the bell icon. There's going to be loads more great videos on jazz, as well as all the classical stuff that I've been doing. So thanks very much for tuning in. Go do some more practice. You're going to need lots of practice if you're doing this and jazz. Take care. I'll go watch more of my videos and take care. Goodbye.